Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Commonwealth would lose its soul if it were to no longer identify itself as a voluntary association of states sharing a fundamental belief that democracy, human rights, and the rule of law are an integral part of development. The furtherance of democracy as a way of life for the well-being of the citizens of its member countries is at the essence of the Commonwealth. However, it is important to recognize that unlike the European Union, there is no sharing of sovereignty in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a strictly intergovernmental international organization comprised of member countries which, with a few significant exceptions, had formed part of the British Empire before obtaining independence. The issue of consensus as a method of decision-making, therefore, in my view, is not only intrinsic to the Commonwealth's nature, but is clearly also influenced by its historical development. All states in the Commonwealth, whether they be the largest democracy or one of the smallest countries in the world, are around the Commonwealth table, sitting in friendship, but also in equality. In this context, in my view, the consensus methodology can hardly develop into a decision-making mechanism based on a majority of whichever sort. It is my opinion that the Commonwealth's spirit of friendly and equal cooperation is fundamentally reliant on consensus. Still, does it have to be the consensus of all the members of the Commonwealth? The Commonwealth leaders themselves, over time, have agreed to an instance where decisions can be taken by consensus, but by a limited number of countries rather than the whole membership. This is the case of the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group, CMAC, as it is known, which I had the honor to chair for a number of years while I was serving as the Board of Foreign Minister. With its rotating composition of foreign ministers from 9 countries drawn from all the various regions of the Commonwealth, CMAC is a peer-based body that by consensus takes decisions as to whether a member country is in breach of the Commonwealth values of democracy, separation of powers, human rights, and the rule of law, and the consequences resulting therefrom. By way of example, during my tenure as chair of CMAC, Fiji and Pakistan were suspended from the Commonwealth, or more precisely, from the councils of the Commonwealth, with a number of consequences, including no participation in the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, SHOGM, and the Commonwealth programs. In Fiji, the issue was a straightforward coup d'etat, and therefore a clear violation of the constitutional order, while in Pakistan, the issue was not a coup d'etat, but action taken by the executive president in flagrant breach of the constitution, the independence of the judiciary, and human rights. In both cases, the decisions were taken by consensus by CMAC after due deliberation. CMAC is a tool unique in international organizations that the Commonwealth has at its disposal to ensure respect for the values of the Commonwealth, as now enshrined in the Commonwealth Charter that you so clearly delineated, Mr. Chairman. These values previously stemmed from the Harare Declaration, the Millbrook Action Programme, and other documents agreed to by the heads of government of the member countries at various charters. CMAC does not only have the so-called nuclear option of suspension from the Commonwealth, which can technically lead to expulsion, although this has never happened. It also has another tool, often overlooked, which is the placing of a country on the CMAC agenda in relation to a particular issue of concern with regard to Commonwealth values. No country wishes to be suspended from the Commonwealth, but also no country takes well to be placed on the agenda of CMAC, for this sensitivity of having democratic legitimacy also applies to all leaders, whatever their level of autocracy. Both these tools at the disposal of seamen can carry weight in national and international public opinion and can therefore serve as a source of moral pressure for the country to return to the right path of respect for democratic values. Is this enough? Most certainly not. One would have to be rather myopic to believe that all the current or past rulers of the Commonwealth member states fit or have fitted comfortably within the term of democrat rather than that of despot. Even if one stretches beyond its limit, the 1991 Harare Declaration's qualification of a democracy and democratic institutions as those, quote, which reflect national circumstances, quote. The Commonwealth Charter thankfully dropped this qualification of national circumstances and unreservedly upheld the democratic values of the Commonwealth, and CMEC's mission to monitor and act in, quote, all instances of serious and persistent violations of Commonwealth values. To render the Charter more effective, in my view, we need to focus on providing more diversified tools in the democracy toolbox at the disposal of CMAC, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the Commonwealth in general. This toolbox was strengthened in the 2011 Charter with a more specific enhanced mandate for CMAC, allowing it to be more proactive and preemptive. Unfortunately, however, the eminent persons group's suggestions for the appointment of a Commonwealth Commissioner for Democracy, the Rule of Law and Human Rights suffered a different fate. This failed reform would have added another important tool in the Commonwealth's democratic values toolbox. Why does this recommendation fail to be implemented? In my view, it failed because a Commonwealth Commissioner for Democracy, the Rule of Law and Human Rights, however welcome that position would be, constitutes a strong political role, which could be seen by some as in competition with the political figure and the role of the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. And such a consideration of itself, of course, would be a source of resistance to the adoption of the recommendation. It is my opinion and my proposal at this meeting that the toolbox of the Commonwealth to implement the values set out in the Commonwealth Charter would be well served with the setting up of a legal expert-based Commonwealth Commission for Democracy through Law, with one legal expert from each member state of the Commonwealth on the Commission. The model for this would be the Council of Europe's European Commission for Democracy through Law, known as the Venice Commission, set up in 1990, initially to assist the new European democracies after the fall of the Berlin Wall, to bring up their European standards, their constitutional structures and their laws, particularly those relating to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The Venice Commission, of which I have formed part since 2013, has 61 member states, including 4 Commonwealth states, the UK, Canada, Malta, and Cyprus, and is composed of legal experts acting independently with the mandate to provide, and I quote, legal opinions to help states bring their legal and institutional structures in line with European standards and international experience in the fields of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Such a Commonwealth Commission for Democracy through Law would essentially A, provide legal opinions on the democratic standards of proposed or adopted legislation in any Commonwealth country, at the request of either the Secretary General or any of the institutions, government, parliament, judiciary of the member country itself. B, assist CMAC at the request of the Secretary General or the Chair of CMAC in assessing whether any proposed or adopted legislation or any constitutional or institutional setup meets with or is in breach of the democratic standards of the Commonwealth as set out in the Commonwealth Charter. The Commission will carry out its legal and advisory role, taking into account the particular country context of the legislation under review, in the same way that the Venice Commission model requires engagement by a limited group of experts with the major stakeholders in the country relating to the political point which is being considered. By way of example, in one of the CMAC cases, which we tackled when I was chair, an important issue was the fact that an elected executive president remained at the same time the effective hands-on head of the armed forces. The Commonwealth Commission of Legal Experts for Democracy Through Law would provide CMAC and the Secretary General with a legal opinion on the issue, on such an issue in the light of the Commonwealth Charter and its democratic values. The advantage from an institutional point of view is that this commission, made up of legal experts, carries out its assessment objectively from a legal and not from a political angle, and therefore will act as a credible support for the Secretary General or CMAC without impinging on their respective political roles. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, as an international organization dedicated to development and democracy as enshrined in the Commonwealth Charter, the Commonwealth needs to further enhance its democratic toolbox. While the appointment of a Commissioner for Democracy, Human Rights and the Rule of Law, as envisaged by the Eminent Persons Group, will certainly constitute a positive reform, there may be resistance to having a political figure alongside also the role of the Secretary General. The Commonwealth can also further strengthen its democratic toolbox with the setting up of a legal expert-based Commonwealth Commission for Democracy Through Law to ensure Commonwealth standards as set out in the Charter are maintained in relation to member countries' constitutional structures and laws, particularly those relating to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Such a commission, in my view, serving as support for the whole organization, but in particular for the Secretary General and CMAC, would further boost the Commonwealth's credentials as an international organization which holds democratic values as fundamental to its membership. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the proposal to set up a new commission, Commonwealth Commission for Democracy Through the Rule of Law. We'll come back to you after the other two speakers. And what intrigues me is perhaps why that not suffer the same fate of the proposal to have the Commission on Human Rights. The same political consideration I would have thought would apply to that as well. But rather in mind, we'll come back. Can we go back to, get back to our session and to our second speaker this morning. And our second speaker is Cheryl Bassar KC, former Ambassador and Active Justice of the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Bahamas. Ambassador Bassar KC is the head of the mission of the Bahamas Embassy in the Kingdom of Belgium and the mission to the European Union. She's a barrister of law with more than 30 years' experience. She was called the Bar of England and Wales and the Bahamas Bar in 1991. Practiced widely as it can also provide consultation and training on anti-money laundering and compliance, financial and legal health and maritime areas. Ambassador Bassar now champions the cause of climate justice and climate action, which is the Bahamas, quote unquote, number one foreign policy issue. With that, I present to you Ambassador Shirley.
Good morning and thank you. I will get right into it. The question at hand is whether the phrase Democrats or despots could be pointing to how well these values are maintained within different countries. While many Commonwealth nations are democracies, others may have leaders who do not fully embody those principles, sometimes leading to tensions about how well the Commonwealth can enforce those shared values. For instance, a country might hold elections, but the process can be skewed or influenced by an autocratic government. The relationship between democracy and governance within the Commonwealth is deeply intertwined, as both are core principles upon which the Commonwealth's foundational values rest. In considering the implementation of these principles, the manner in which they manifest in governance can vary significantly depending on each country's context, political nature and culture, and the interpretation of the Commonwealth's guiding frameworks. I think the scope of the Commonwealth should always be borne in mind. 56 countries, 6 continents, more than 2.5 billion people. At its core, the Commonwealth champions democracy, advocating for accountable, transparent, and inclusive governance structures. This is reflected in the commitment to upholding free and fair elections, political participation, and the protection of civil liberties. The Commonwealth, through its various bodies and initiatives, and those have been mentioned earlier, seeks to promote democratic principles, support electoral integrity, and assist member states in strengthening their democratic institutions. Governance within the Commonwealth focuses on the principles of the rule of law, transparency, human rights, and good governance. The Commonwealth's commitment to sustainable development and social equity requires member states to establish institutions that foster both political and economic stability, inclusive growth, and a fair distribution of resources. The Commonwealth Charter serves as a guiding document. The Charter sets out an ideal framework, but its actual impact depends on how it is implemented and whether member states adhere to its principles. The strengths of the Charter are as follows: its normative power, the encouragement of peer pressure, and that is seen in regular meetings like CHOGM, and support for electoral integrity. The limitations, however, is the lack of a binding enforcement, diverse political systems, and state sovereignty versus intervention. Some regimes within the Commonwealth have used the Charter and the Association's broader framework to justify actions that may not necessarily align with its democratic and governance ideals. The lack of enforceable sanctions or consequences means that certain governments have been able to selectively interpret the Charter's provisions to suit their own needs. The effectiveness of the Commonwealth as a force for democratic governance depends largely on the willingness of member states to uphold shared values and on the diplomatic and peer pressure exerted within the Commonwealth network. In juxtaposing the Commonwealth Charter to the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights, the latter charter provides a set of fundamental rights and freedoms guaranteed to all citizens within the European Union. This includes civil, political, economic, and social rights, and it applies to EU institutions and member states when they implement EU law. That charter has legal force, meaning its principles can be enforced through the courts and legal mechanisms in the European Union. It is legally binding on all EU institutions and EU member states when implementing EU law. It has been integrated into the legal system of the European Union, with citizens being able to invoke its provisions in EU courts. The Commonwealth Charter includes countries with very different political systems, from democratic to monarchies, as well as countries with varying levels of economic development. The European Union Charter, on the other hand, applies to 27 European Union member states, each of which is bound by EU law. Dealing with human rights and democracy, the Commonwealth Charter calls for promotion of democracy and human rights. The European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights includes explicit rights related to democracy and human rights, such as the right to vote in European and local elections, the right to respect for private and family life, and protections from torture and degrading treatment. As it relates to enforcement mechanisms, the Commonwealth Charter has no formal enforcement mechanisms. The Commonwealth is more of a voluntary association based on shared values. The countries can be politically or diplomatically pressured by other member states or by the Commonwealth Secretariat if they are seen to be violating the principles of the Charter, but there are no direct or legal consequences. The questions that I wish to pose at this point, and the areas to highlight, which will lead to further discussions are as follows. The acts of concerns arising from impunity in governance, but bilateral diplomacy continues. Secondly, there can be instances where it is seen that countries or the Commonwealth continues to break bread with the offender. Thirdly, the acceptance of vague phrases such as committed to a strategic path or a decision will be made very soon on the formation of a new government or holding elections. Flash, but no substance, interchangeable facades, political convenience. Do we focus wrongly on lip service compliance, which is not equipped to address deeper governance problems arising out of the actions of the despot? What should the Commonwealth do as a champion of the rule of law that is not being effective in a member state, but the people of that state are demanding it, i.e., democracy is now inevitable? When does the Commonwealth draw the line when a stabilizing force in its rank becomes risky owing to its support of him? How safe is democracy? For Winston Churchill, it is the least bad form of government. As Roth indicated, the meaning of democracy lies too much in the eye of the beholder, while human right anchors itself in specificity and a legally binding nature. This discussion must be couched in the global geopolitical conditions and what some are calling the global and economic geopolitical reset. As countries scramble to make new alliances and rethink severed relations, it is near impossible for 56 states to be in one accord and walking the straight path at all times. We have seen that in the signing of the Samoa Agreement between the OECDS and the European Union. And of course, we have to look at the issue of consensus and whether that consensus is readily identified in domestic legislation. These issues are not peculiar to the Commonwealth Charter. What is key, in my opinion, is this. The Charter is an inspirational and aspirational document. It is the culmination of many agreements, and it is a conglomeration, a platform, not a pedestal. The Commonwealth can help with enabling an environment conducive to the rule of law and governance, even when consensus is not immediate or when it is disqualified by a dissenting voice. The Commonwealth can enable the environment, but sustaining the environment is outside of its ambit. There is a consensus of what we want to be. The issue is how to make it work. And lastly, the question to ask ourselves is whether in this geopolitical environment, could we have produced a document that reads as the Charter does? Would it be possible? Our discussions will render our conclusion of a yes, no, or maybe. Thank you.
Ambassador Prasad was a very powerful resource. I hope we have time to get into them. Really go to the core of how effective this charter is, whether it's just a collection of pious platitudes or it's meant to be something that can be taken and enforced. And I wish to ask you to consider this questions that you posed. I think in many nations that are here, one of the central problems that we have is the important institutions of state. There are many institutions who are charged with protection of human rights. So we are going, we see those institutions being reshaped, founded well, fundamentally right in the way they accepted. But today, because of diverse pressures and interferences, they enabled and they no longer are what they were. Can you really consider how any way the charter can be used to strengthen the institution within them? Something that we mentioned. And I move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Justice Surya Kant from India. He was born on February graduated from law from Maharishi Dayal University. I started practicing law in district courts. Then shifted his practice to Punjab and Haryana High Court, where we got specialized in constitutional and service and civil matters. He also earned the distinction of being appointed youngest Advocate General of Haryana, and also designated CBI. Then was appointed as the Chief Justice of High Court of Himachal Pradesh. Thereafter, he was elevated as a judge of the Supreme Court of India and he fought the He's currently the chairman of the Supreme Court Legal Services Committee. He's also a member of various committees of the Indian Law Institute, University, and the Agency. Right, Justice Khan, to make sense. Thank you.
Distinguished and eminent jurists, known and of the dais, a very good morning. It is with deep humility and an abiding sense of constitutional responsibility that I rise to address this august assembly on behalf of Indian judiciary. To speak on this platform is both a rare honor and an occasion for solemn reflection for me. I must congratulate the Commonwealth Lawyers Association for bringing this event together on a subject of such immense contemporary relevance. Friends, the Commonwealth represents more than a mere historical association. It is a principled fraternity of nations bound by shared history, values, and legal traditions. Despite our diverse cultures and systems of governance, we remain united in our pursuit of democratic ideals, constitutional governance, and human dignity. The adoption of the Commonwealth Charter in 2013 marked a momentous occasion in the history of Commonwealth of Nations. This chapter has since then become the defining document as it unleashed the core values and principles to which all our member states have committed themselves. India, as the world's largest constitutional democracy, has displayed an abiding sense of commitment to the Commonwealth's founding principles. Speaking on behalf of the institution I represent, I would like to highlight some of the Indian judiciary's endeavors through progressive interpretation of law and transformative adjudication, promoting constitutional morality, a leitmotif of the Commonwealth Charter 2. To begin with, Indian courts do not just interpret the law as a cold command, but as a living document of justice. This was indeed envisioned by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of our Constitution, who had said, and I quote, "The Constitution is not a mere lawyer's document, it is a vehicle of life, and its spirit is always the spirit of the age." These words underscore the interpretive responsibility of constitutional courts, especially in nations like ours, where the Constitution is not a fossilized parchment but a dynamic expression of people's collective aspirations. The rule of law, which is a principle enshrined in Part 7 of the Commonwealth Charter, has been embedded in India as the heritage of all mankind, which runs into like a golden thread through the fabric of the Indian Constitution, ensuring that all citizens enjoy basic human rights. The notion of rule of law plays such a critical role in Indian jurisprudence that it is a part of the inviolable basic structure of the Constitution, as our 13 bench have interpreted in case 1 Bharti's case. With the rule of law culminating its part, the Supreme Court has made progressive strides across various domains, including human rights, the freedom of speech, the right to equality and equity, right of prisoners, and the right to life. Advancements that collectively reflect the true spirit of the Commonwealth Charter. Given the constraints of time, I will briefly touch upon only a few subjects. The first of which is enshrined in Article 9 and 10 of the Charter of Commonwealth, commitment of member states towards promoting sustainable development and protecting the environment. The Indian Supreme Court has traced the origin of the idea of sustainable development to ancient India, where one lived in harmony with the Panch Mahabhutas, or the five foundational elements of nature, namely water, earth, fire, air, and space. Drawing inspiration from Article 21 of our Constitution, the Supreme Court has expanded the principles of sustainable development for the protection of Indian ecological fabric while ensuring that development does not trample with upon the fragile balance that sustains life. These judicial initiatives include reduction in industrial pollution and improved water quality of Ganga River in MC Mehta's case, the enforcement of polluter pays principle while addressing the severe environmental pollution caused by tanneries and industries affecting the Palar River, that was Vellore citizens' case. The principle of absolute liability for industrial accidents, shaping liability standards for enterprises engaged in hazardous activities were also enforced in MC Mehta's case. The right to a healthy environment as a fundamental right under Article 21 of our Constitution was also enforced in very famous case of rural litigation and entitlement Kendra's case. The other aspect that I would like to shine a spotlight on is India's commitment to gender equality. The Supreme Court has been a vanguard in women empowerment and its vision resonates with key Commonwealth commitments, including the Ottawa Declaration on Women 1991 and the Harare Declaration of also 1991, both of which emphasize the empowerment of women, the protection of their rights, and the active elimination of gender based discrimination across our societies. In this spirit, India has charted a unique and transformative path. The Supreme Court dealt with the issue of exclusion of women from certain spaces, as though, like where liquor is served and held, that rather than safeguarding women, these practices reinforced oppressive stereotypes that confine women to traditional roles. That was the case of Anushka. In Sharabano, the Supreme Court held the discriminatory practice of triple talaq was illegal and it was abolished. In Muhammad Ahmad Khan Shahbano's case, Supreme Court declared that divorced women from all religious communities are entitled to maintenance. Similarly, equal inheritance rights for women have been authoritatively ensured. Furthermore, the judiciary has consistently safeguarded women's reproductive autonomy, affirming that women's control over their own body is fundamental to their dignity and their right to life. Whether it is in terms of that their right to choose abortion or challenging coercive sterilization practices. Additionally, the court has acknowledged the importance of maternity benefits to ensure that women can fully participate in the workforce without compromising on their family obligations. This approach is concomitant to the principles of Harare Declaration, which emphasizes women's equal access to economic opportunities. I truly believe that we have made fundamental attempts towards understanding gender equality from a mere formal notion to one rooted in substantive justice. Very recently, we have, even in the absence of any statutory framework, made 30% reservation in bar associations exclusively for women through our judicial dictum. I would also like to point out that it's not only on judicial side. As an executive chairperson of the Supreme Court Legal Service Committee, in last 3 months, I have with a team of my officers been able to identify more than 4,200 convicts who need legal aid, either for filing appeal in Supreme Court or for their release on grant of bail. We are committed that in next 1 month, before I dimit the office of the Legal Service Committee, all these persons will be provided free legal aid, and we have decided to circulate a panel of all leading senior advocates of the Supreme Court who are kind enough to render pro bono services, leaving it to the choice of the convict that whom he wants to engage. This new experiment we will introduce and implement within 1 month. As you tell, the Supreme Court of India can consistently been, it has been the forefront of shaping the moral and ethical fabric of our society. Its landmark decisions were arrived at through the power of collaboration and consensus, which brings us to the very reason we have gathered here today. In the intrinsic capacity of global politics, the interplay between democratic ideals and despotic governance sparks a debate that is as timeless as it is urgent. Today, we congregate, we congregate to wrestle with a question of profound significance and complexity. The question is, despots and democrats, does consensus work? This question not only probes the philosophical and practical underpinnings of the politics, but also challenges the boundaries of cultural understanding and human cooperation. The growing interlinking of the global economy has created mutual interests and dependencies between nations, regardless of their political ideologies and learnings. This calls upon us to examine the fundamental tenets of democracy and despotism and assess whether these seemingly antithetical ideologies can converge in meaningful dialogue and mutual understanding. Democracy, as we celebrate and cherish, represents a political system that champions individuals' freedom, the rule of law, and the voice of the people. It is a process grounded in dialogue, negotiation, and compromise where power is dispersed and leaders are accountable to the masses. It is a political system that stands as a beacon of hope for those who dream of participation and representation in democratic system. Consensus is not merely a desirable outcome, it is the cornerstone of governance, ensuring that diverse voices are heard and interests are balanced. Conversely, despotism often embodies the concentration of power in the hands of a single entity. It's a political system driven by aims of an elite few, where decisions are made unilaterally, often in secrecy, without the need for public consensus or accountability. In despite regime, in a despotic regime, control leads to overshadow freedom and dissent is often quelled. The despot is frequently viewed as the antithesis of democratic ideals, standing apart from the will of people they govern. The variance between these systems raise an essential question: can Democrats and despots find common ground through consensus? Can a dialogue be held between the freedom of democracy and the control of despotism? The answer lies in the nuanced understanding of what consensus entails. True consensus requires more than mere agreement, it demands a commitment to the mutual respect and understanding. Mahatma Gandhi, the father of India nation, once said, and I quote, honest disagreement is often a good sign of progress. Thus, highlighting that through open dialogue and consensus, true advancement is achieved. As we grapple with global challenges such as climate change and economic inequalities, consensus driven approach are crucial in crafting sustainable solutions that are just and equitable. One of these first steps towards this consensus is acknowledgement and respecting the cultural, social, and historical context that shape political ideologies. Instead of imposing one system over another, it is crucial to identify and respect these differences. It requires an earnest effort to identify shared goals which transcend political systems. Issues like global health, climate change, counterterrorism, trade agreements, and arms control are the areas where both Democrats and despots have a common interest in collaboration. By focusing on these shared challenges, a mutually agreeable framework can be evolved. Furthermore, the global community must play a pivotal role in facilitating this dialogue. Nations with historical ties to both democratic and despotic systems can be the best bridges in fostering dialogue. Similarly, global institutions like the Commonwealth platforms can help in creating conducive environments for understanding and compromise. Naturally, achieving consensus is not without challenges. It demands effort and commitment, requiring us to transcend our biases and prejudices. It involves negotiation and compromise, which can be difficult to achieve in the face of entrenched divisions. While the path to consensus is fraught with obstacles, it also brings opportunity to progress. It offers a chance for the discourse to recognize the benefits of inclusive governance, where listening to the people can lead to greater stability and prosperity. For Democrats, engaging in the despotic regimes can unveil techniques to mobilize and deploy resources for long-term strategic goals, provided it is approached with caution and sincere intent. The road to consensus between despots and Democrats is undoubtedly long and arduous, yet it is not beyond reach. It demands unwavering commitment, profound empathy, and an unshakable belief in the power of dialogue. It requires leaders who are visionaries, willing to surpass personal gain for the greater good. In this pursuit, consensus becomes not only a possibility, but a testament to our shared humanity. In such an endeavor, we not only shape a more harmonious world, but also reaffirm our collective potential to rise above discord, crafting a future where the ideals of democracy can flourish alongside the realities of diverse political landscape. My friends, India and Indian judiciary is a promise of such commitment. In this vein, I propose to host and invite all of you to a joint conference of all Commonwealth platforms somewhere in February or March 2026. I leave for that to you to decide. But my invitation to all of you will be there to have one umbrella to discuss all the issues of the Commonwealth different platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move forward, let us commit to nurturing a culture of consensus where the diversity of thought is celebrated and the common good is pursued. As we strive toward this noble goal, let us do so with hope and determination, for it is indeed crucible of compromise and understanding that the future of our world will be forged, where despots and democrats can work together to create a brighter future for all. Thank you.
And as you were speaking, I was going through the Conrad chapter. And with my basic knowledge of your constitution, I find that much of what you have said is actually reflected in that you said about the Indian constitution. It's reflected in the Conrad chapter. So you may want to question this whether the Indian Supreme Court has recognized the Conrad charter, if not the substance, form, the spirit that is in the application, and whether or not the approach should be that if that is indeed the case, then the principles in this charter, both in substance and spirit, should be reflected in the written constitutions of the Commonwealth countries. That may be a way in which we can lead to the charter. And I do appreciate the robust way in which the Indian Supreme Court has interpreted the Indian Constitution, expanding it sometimes well beyond what I think the reading of the Constitution. And then it is in that I say that perhaps spirit you have adopted. Thank you. Can I go back to Dr. Pedro? Can we deal with that question? You have proposed, we have before us this commissioner that I think we expected to be a panacea a sense, to enforce the charter, keep the charter as it is. But you have told us why that did not work, could not work, and you have proposed a commission for democracy through the rule of law. Why do you think that would work? That would be acceptable? Why do you think that will not suffer the same fate, the political fate as well, that beset the creation of that office of commission?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Not a very easy one, and not very nice of you to me, but here we go. Let me say at the outset that I don't think that one excludes the other, and that there are instances, for example, the Council of Europe, which is an older institution of the European Union, has got a European Commissioner for Human Rights, who is the champion for human rights and who looks at the situation in the member states of the Council of Europe and reports on human rights. They also have, as the Council of Europe, it also got the Venice Commission. So it has a grouping of legal experts who are looking at laws and making suggestions and recommendations on how to make those laws better. So why do I think it has a better chance? I already mentioned, I think that perhaps the fact that the Human Rights Commissioner, the rule of law, democracy, rule of law, and human rights commissioner is a political figure because it's also a political mandate to actually be the champion of the charter. This, I think, in my opinion, has been seen by some as being conflictual with the role of the Secretary General, or at least taking away from the role of what the Secretary General should be doing as well. But having said that, it would be an added tool to the toolbox if we could have this commission. We need the leaders' consensus to be able to do this, and we need the leaders' consensus in a choice so that this can actually be adopted. We did not get this, even when we got the leaders' consensus in Perth for the extension of the mandate of CMAC. And so what I'm suggesting is to try again, but to try again in a different way, but to try again by having a legal-based commission. In other words, a commission made of legal experts. They could be legislators, they could be lawyers, they could be law professors, they could be members of the judiciary. I'm explaining to you exactly how the membership of the Venice Commission is made up of all these various persons nominated. And I think this would be a softer touch. In other words, you would have lawyers working at the coal face, because Venice Commission, the lawyers, the legal-based commission, will be working at the coal face. It will be dealing with legislation. It will be seeing how legislation can be improved in the light of human rights, democracy, and rule of law standards, of course. But taking this from a legal point of view, would it be the thin end of the wedge? And would the leaders also see it as the thin end of the wedge? Yes, it is the thin end of the wedge. It is the thin end of the wedge. But it can also be incremental. In other words, when you are giving a mandate to such a commission, you could give it a mandate where it would only respond, for example, to requests from member states, and exceptionally only from the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. So you could always find a way in which this could be accepted as a concept. If it's accepted as a concept, I feel that it will add quite a lot of weight to the toolbox of the Commonwealth to enforce the Charter. But let me remind you, and historically, that the person the Italian minister who actually suggested the Venice Commission to the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers was refused 3 times. So this idea did not take root for 3 times. It's the fourth time that he was given a chance and that this commission was set up. It was set up around the fall of the wall of Berlin, and it incrementally became more influential. Now, the opinions of the Venice Commission, the opinions of the of the Commonwealth Commission would be advisory. That doesn't mean they will not be influential, because they will be taken up by the press, they'll be taken up by the opposition, they'll be taken up by by the lawyers in the country, and that would mean that they will have more influence than actually perhaps a political view of things might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kondo. Mr. Razak, can we deal with the insufficiencies, the concerns that I expressed, that we see these days increasing institutions of state coming under attack. They can't stand for what they've been charged to discharge or charged to perform. When I look at the Commonwealth Charter, I do understand the thrust of your presentation that but much of this is well written on paper. Where is the enforcement? Where is the power to enforce? Where is the power to actually bring this to a solution, a tangible solution for those who are facing the burden of breach? If you look at the Charter itself, it does say, under democracy, we support the role of the Commonwealth Ministerial CIMAC to address promptly and effectively all instances of serious or persistent violations of Commonwealth values without any fear or fear. Does that help? Does that take us any further?
Thank you for the follow-up question. And let me start by saying that dominant and external factors and forces are indeed shaping our contemporary reality. But in order for the Commonwealth to maintain moral authority on the global stage, further discussions must be had. Quiet diplomacy is indeed employed, and under the rubric of democracy in the Charter, where it calls for CMAG CMAG is tasked to promptly and effectively address actions of member states offensive to the Charter. However, while diplomacy can confront, challenge, and influence stakeholders, and this is seen in instances that predate the Charter, example, the Fiji suspension of nations like Nigeria. In my opinion, there needs to be an iteration of the Charter by the addition of legal enforcement and the development of further institutions to support this legal enforcement. And if we can liken it to the legislation passed in our domestic environment, if there's no enforcement of same, then at the end of the day, how do we expect the same to be effective in causing change among persons affected by these directives as laid out in the Charter?
Thank you. Scott? As I mentioned, if you go through the Charter itself, you will see many aspects of this Charter, which perhaps is what you spoke about, just on the basic structure doctrine that the Supreme Court of India, in the case of Nevada case, established. And so, as I understand, it's a binding position in India. Has the Indian Supreme Court recognized the Charter in its decision making? And now that you have looked at the Charter, you see avenues for the Indian Supreme Court using the Charter, perhaps not mentioning it expressly, but taking the principles here in your jurisprudence, to then give teeth to Charter in national and domestic.
Well, let's understand two things very clearly. One is that the Indian Constitution itself is a self-contained document, and probably one of the constitutions which has really very elaborately incorporated in terms of the fundamental rights and certain constitutional rights. I would say broadly the human rights, including which the Commonwealth platforms profess. So that you will find very much embedded as integral part of the Indian Constitution. The second thing is that, as I said, the proactive and constructive role of the Supreme Court, that they have not taken it as the static words or expressions in the Constitution, and they have always attempted to give a live interpretation to those provisions. If someone would read Article 21 in its as an abstract, probably you will not find that much which has been read into by the Supreme Court from time to time after one or the other landmark judgment. And very in recent times, which of course I didn't mention, like for example, the right to privacy has been absolutely read into Article 21 of the Constitution. So I believe that Commonwealth platform, the charter, the principles are always are guiding factor for any society which profess, any system which is committed to the rule of law and governance, good governance. So India as a committed democracy, one of the largest democracy in the world, and where we can proudly say that our Indian judiciary has been very successful in enforcing the rights of the people and protecting that very overzealously. So all these principles contained in Commonwealth chapter have always been a very guiding factor.
Thank you.
And as I said, these will continue to be the guiding factors in future as well. The law will keep on evolving. There will be new dimensions and new meanings. So probably the constitution, as I said, is not to be read in isolation. And the surroundings, principles of certain guidelines have been evolved in the countries or in the group to which India is also party and signatory. I'm quite sure those principles will continue to be followed by us.
Thank you. Now we do have a bit of time, and this is a plenary, and we do not normally take on questions during plenary. The topic is an important topic. We have a document here that much hope has been placed on it to offer solutions, as I said earlier, tangible solutions, myriad problems that we face in governance in our respective states. And yet, you've heard from the panel members, and you discern from them that the document, well, it's well written and well thought of, and has reached its desired, but it doesn't really have, perhaps, the desired effect. I wonder whether or not I could take a few questions from the floor. Unfortunately, I do not think there are mics. You may have to come up to the podium to place your question to any of the panel members. Oh, yes, good. Good. Yes, if you don't mind, if I can invite you to just come up, because there's a roving mic, I don't think we do. This is where the president acts out of script. Kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm Karen Burrow from the Commonwealth Magistrates and Judges Association, and I just wanted to maybe expand some of the issues that have been said today, because we act as the Secretariat for the Latin House Working Group, and one of the issues was in 2008 we had a plan of action for the Commonwealth on the Latin House principles, which suggested that a standing committee of Commonwealth associations, in particular Commonwealth Lawyers Association, Commonwealth Legal Education Association, my association, Commonwealth Magistrates and Judges Association, and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association should form a standing committee to assist CMAG and to assist in progressing the principles as not an aspirational document, but as a set of minimum standards which the Latin House guidelines and principles were destined to be. I just wanted to know from the speakers whether what role they see our organisations, the ones that promote democratic values in particular within the Commonwealth, what role do they see us playing in assisting, whether it's a commission or a standing committee, or even as we had in the early 2000s, being invited as as contributors to a CMAG meeting to provide information, more particularly in our areas of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
I think that's a very good point that you raise. CMAC, in my opinion, should be drawing on the expertise and experience of associations like the association that you mentioned yourselves, like the Commonwealth Association, which is of course a standalone association. But CMAC actually does consult, and the chair of CMAC and the secretary general and the members of CMAC are absolutely free to consult with whoever they want. And I have experienced myself consultations, particularly with the country which was being discussed, so that sometimes a country is put on the agenda of CMAC and that country requests to be heard, and CMAC will hear that country. And I think the availability of the agenda of CMAC to associations in the Commonwealth should be a starting point, so that they can perhaps ask to be heard and to be listened to, but also for their expertise to be put into good use. So yes, I would say that I think there is space for that.
Thank you, Brando. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Faizan Mustafa. I teach law in India. The question is not about Commonwealth, European Union, what they can do. If in a country after country, political parties are nominating leaders about whom they know because of their background that they are tilting towards despotism or autocracy, what do we do? The real decision in a democracy is taken by the political parties. They are not acting as a gatekeepers of democracy. And people are also voting for them. What can be done about that?
The simple answer is that we must respect the will of the people in a democracy.
Simple but true, yes. You want to say something? Yes.
I fully agree that the simple answer is that. A little bit of a complicated one, perhaps, and that is that some countries are now seeing that they need to protect their own democracies. In other words, how can you protect democratically a democracy from an illiberal democratic concept? And there are, of course, some countries, particularly countries like Germany, that have gone through some very difficult times in their history. The German constitution is a constitution which has a clause which says that you are entitled to bear arms in defense of democracy.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to ask. Oh, sorry. Is there anything? Yes. Ask question, yes. I can take you to, you'd like to just come to the front, then I can take you immediately after.
Yeah, my name is Ian Mugaya from Nairobi, Kenya. I want to commend the panelists for very good presentation. I'd like to hear your views about what I consider to be very worrisome development in democracies across the world, which is the tension between the the role of executive authority and the role of the courts. Increasingly, by executives behaving more authoritarian, judiciaries are called upon to determine questions that a generation ago we would have thought were purely political problems. We see that in America during the investigations against Trump. We see that in France today, in the investigations against Le Pen. And we see that replicated in Africa, in Asia, and in many other places. South Korea is another good example. Do you see a danger to the rule of law caused by those circumstances? Or do you see the judiciary being able to withstand the judicialization of politics?
Sorry, can we take on the next question, the last question, and we have to close? Christian, I'm sorry.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Williams, and I'm a law student. And I am a firm believer in the rule of law. And I respectfully ask that we look beyond the words of politicians. The law that Dr. Tant mentioned earlier is Bill 125, whereupon the right of a citizen to request a magisterial inquiry into perceived wrongdoings has been removed. Now, a citizen has to go to the police commissioner, and if you are reporting any illegalities within the political realm or police itself, it's not looking good. Thank you for the opportunity, and I urge all Commonwealth members, EU, and the common man in the street to believe in what is right and to continue doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a moment for the last question, yes.
Thank you very much, Steve, and I promise to be really short with this young discussion. And probably as I'm possibly one of the few German trained lawyers in the country, I should just briefly, in response to Dr. Frendo, say, and in case you think that Germans are armed to the teeth in defense of the Constitution, I do believe, though, that it is a result of our historic experience in Germany, which unfortunately is missing in some other countries, not through no fault of their own, that there is a provision in case that anyone undertakes to abolish certain fundamental tenets of the Constitution in terms of the separation of powers and very limited other elements, to engage in resistance, it says. Yeah. So, the word armed isn't actually mentioned, but it is potentially implied. But more importantly, listening to the discussion, what I'd like to do is just encourage the CLA, and maybe you want to reflect on that, to engage together with other international lawyers associations to form a campaign which is really a grassroots campaign, because we have to see that the battle is lost largely at the end of the voting spectrum. So the voters go towards forces that are anti-democratic and anti-rule. And I think anyone who has the power to engage in the membership of associations, to see what can be done in schools and universities, practitioners going out, now is the time to really engage in campaigning. Thank you.
We'll round up now, and I'll use the last question, the question before, as the round up. And the question posed is, how do you deal with the overweening exercise of executive power that intrudes into the defense of the judiciary, to the point where it is subordinate or subjugate the judiciary, and the commission no longer can fairness, especially. Of course, that must be in the context of what's the World Charter, how that can be called. Even force
Thank you very much. Allow me, Mr. Chairman, however, to also respond to the issue about the German law and the German constitution, which actually I say a certain amount of admiration because I came across this when I was writing an article about a right which one of the Aragonese kings had given to the Maltese in the 1400s, which was to take up arms and somebody took their rights away. And I think not only the German constitution has this, but in Europe perhaps it might be the only one, but the issue of resistance to the overthrow of the democratic order, I think might exist also in other constitutions in South America and other parts of the world. But I say that with admiration, not with any level of criticism, because we're facing a situation where as he said, the voters are tending to go towards simplistic solutions which might come from parties which are more authoritarian. And these parties are also attacking the independence of the judiciary, and that is, I think, a major issue. People are speaking about judicial overreach, and therefore the right of, if I'm elected, then I'm the winner takes all situation, and I have a right to actually implement my program. And as one American president, who you might know, has just said very recently, who elected this man? Because the judge, of course, was contesting what he was doing. So I think we have to defend the institutions, essentially. We have to defend the institutions because democracy is not about only elections. Democracy is what happens in between as well. And I think that is the most important issue that we have in front of us. One final point I'd like to make is the point about the enforceability, the legal enforceability of the charter. The charter would need to be framed in a convention for this to happen, in my view, because it's essentially a political declaration of principles, and it might be useful, interesting, not only to have the convention adopted by the member states of the Commonwealth, but there's an example which we have done in this country many years ago, whereby we put the European Charter of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, and we incorporated the convention into local law. So that the courts, local courts, can now actually enforce the convention. Thank you.
Well, very briefly on the point of enforcement of definition power by executive. From Indian perspective, and maybe that globally also it's happening like that, I would share that one is that in terms of if you go by the constitutional philosophy and constitutional principle, then there is a complete separation of power for the legislature, for the executive, and for the judiciary. So they are not supposed to overlap and include into the identified areas of each other. But then it does happen. And in India, the judiciary has been accused on many times that we have encroached on the power of the legislature, we have encroached on the power of the executive, particularly when in exercise of the very unique jurisdiction which India's constitutional courts have evolved, that is of entertaining the public interest litigation. I'm not giving elaborate discussion on that issue, but the concept of public interest litigation has really enabled the courts to address so many issues where there is no formal litigant before us, but then cause which concern the public at large, and particularly those who are marginalized sections, downtrodden, and those who are economically or socially backward communities. Their causes have been raised before the courts, including environment and all these things. So there the courts have been passing certain directions even with respect to the vacuum created for want of a legislation or want of a legislative policy. So the courts have been issuing directions and we have been accused of that we are encroaching upon the executive and legislature. So happens sometimes even for the other side also. But I think this is a war of word, it will continue. One should be only considered alive of the power which you are conferred on you and you exercise that. That's all.
So I have the opportunity to wrap it up, and what I would like to say is that the charter is a good starting point. It really reflects who we are as a group of nations. The question raised with respect to the executive and the judiciary really sends the warning that we really have to be alert to words and actions that are tending to neutralize and justify the operation of states of affairs that do not reflect the words and the values of the Charter. And so, in order for us to then move forward, and as indicated in discussions and what my co-panelist has indicated, we now need to move the Charter beyond just being an aspirational document and to give it some legality and some teeth in order to create enforcement among our nations in order to safeguard what is happening geopolitically and indeed which threatens our very future. And as this conference is held under the title Fit for Future, and so it is now very important that we now put in place measures that ensure that we have a future that we can come back and have these discussions and that the rule of law abounds not just in theory, but indeed in practice.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now, on your behalf, thank the three panel members for their presentations and contributions. It is, of course, a topic that will be much discussed over the next few days as to how far the Commonwealth Charter can be used in effect to us. And it's a very good start. I thank you again for your presentation and for the work that you put in preparing for this session. Please join me in thanking